Good morning to you. All right, so this morning we're going to start off by talking about communication and conflict. And I see that they go together because you don't get in trouble if you're not talking, or you do get in trouble if you're talking, right? Either way, communication and conflict go together. And so we're going to try to merge those two. And we need to stop at what time? 10:30? Roughly 10:30? Okay. All right. I have a very different view about communication. It's not unique with me. It is one that when I was reading Gottman's stuff, I became challenged by it and thought through it again and came to a conclusion that's very similar to his. In fact, I would say it's merged with his. I have a lot of couples over the years who have come in and said, you know, we don't have good communication. We don't have good communication. We don't talk well with each other. I had an older couple. They were in their 50s, and because it's usually younger couples who come to see me, not older couples. So I had an older couple. They were in their 50s, and they were empty nesters. They had just become empty nesters. Both of their kids had grown up, left home. They weren't close by. And the first thing she said to me is, he never talks. He never talks. And I listened to her about that for just a moment. And then I looked at him and I said, well, she says you never talk. And she says, I can tell you what he's going to say. He's going to say, and she filled in the blanks. And I said, okay. And I looked back at him and I said, how would you like to respond to this? And she said, well, I'll tell you what he's going to say. And she begins again to tell me. And I held up my hand to her and I said, yeah, let me hear it from him. And so third time I turned back to him and I said, how would you like to respond to this? You don't say anything. And you know what happened next, right? She said, look, I've already told you what he's going to say. And I just held up my hand. I said, hush, you're done. I've heard what you've got to say. I want to talk to your husband here. And so I turned to him fourth time and I said, I think I know what the problem is. And he laughed, he grinned, and she started laughing, which I knew I'd said the right thing because she wasn't offended by that. She said, yeah, I do talk a lot. He still has not talked. She said, yeah, I do talk a lot. And he looked at me and he went, mm-hmm. That was it. That was it. And I said, and we had a great outcome. We did. She had to relearn. And as she explained to me, she said, I always talk to my kids and now they're gone and I have nobody to talk to. I said, tell me about dating. Told you this last night. I get couples to go back to the dating years and I start all over again with them. Tell me about dating. He talked a lot? No. So why did the rules change? If you married him knowing he didn't talk a lot, why now, 30 years into your marriage, are you demanding that he start talking? Now, I'm not opposed to men talking. I think men should talk. But why did the rules change? Because the kids are grown up. And they had to learn how to be, we talked about this last night, they had to learn how to have fun together again. They've forgotten how to do that. So when people come to me and say, we don't communicate, let's start here. You cannot not communicate. I know Mrs. Haynes, my English teacher in the 12th grade, would be shocked and dismayed. Give me an automatic F with a double negative. You cannot not communicate. You get it? You're going to say something. There is a message that's going to come out even in the silence. Sometimes it's the message in the silence that's even worse than the verbal messages. Because in the silence, what do we do? What do we do? Come on, help me out. What do we do in the silence? We guess. We think we know what they're thinking. Barbara and I have been married 42 years. She has learned over the years that when she looks at me and she says, "What are you thinking?" and I say nothing, that is the truth. She's finally learned it. No, what are you really thinking? The nothing part of my brain is really large. I'm thinking of nothing. Sometimes in the silence, we presume what the other person is thinking. And in the silence, we're still communicating because we are now injecting ourselves into that other person's life and saying, "I know what you're thinking." And we start operating based upon that perception, which may not be accurate at all. You cannot not communicate. One way or the other, you do say something. There is a message that's transmitted in connection with another person. Turn to Matthew chapter 20. I will be the first to admit that this text is not intended to be a text about communication, but it is intended to be a text about how relationships work. And while it may not be specifically about communication, we are talking about relationships. This is a relational text. This is a text that talks about there's two ways, Jesus says, that relationships will work. Matthew chapter 20, beginning in verse 20. Let me set the stage for this. Back in Matthew chapter 18, Jesus had a discussion with his disciples that he said he's coming into his kingdom. And when he comes into his kingdom fully, each of them will have a throne. So when we come to 2020, Matthew 20, verse 20, we must not assume that, where did all this come from? He's kind of laid the foundation for it himself. He's talked about that each of them will have a throne upon which to sit and judge Israel. Well, that sounds kingly, doesn't it? I mean, that sounds like, hey, a great deal's coming our way. So when James and John come to Jesus and say, "We want the right and the left," it's not without foundation. They just misunderstood what Jesus meant by each of you will have a throne. They just misunderstand. But it doesn't mean they don't have a concept in mind because Jesus has already suggested it. You with me? James and John come and they ask Jesus. Matthew's the one that tells us this. The mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons and kneeling down asked a favor of him. That just makes me laugh. It's kind of the image of a mama's boy. Matthew's the only one that tells us this. They don't ask, their mom asks. Now, how in the world did mom get brought into this? That's my question. And the question, my answer, I think, speculating, is they went home and said, "We've been promised a throne." And now she's gotten excited about it. It's kind of like, ooh, we're moving up in the world. And so she comes to Jesus. James and John, I love this image. James and John are behind her. She's in front. She kneels down in front of Jesus. She said, I got a favor to ask. And James and John are back there. They're just kind of drawn up. They're just kind of waiting. Mom's going to handle this. These are fishermen. I don't know what you know about first century fishermen, but they are strong men. They are men. They're a man's man. I've got a great friend who is a man's man. He is a hunter, a fisherman. He is all things. I've told him if we ever go into a zombie apocalypse, I'm coming to live with you because you will make sure we live off the land and all that kind of stuff. And he says, well, my kids come first. Yeah, well, I'll eat the leftovers. That's fine. I mean, he can fry up squirrel, rabbit, all that stuff. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. And it all tastes like chicken. But anyway, the idea is these are men's men. I mean, these are guys who have worked out in the darkest of dark nights fishing, pulling up nets filled with fish. They are well muscled, and yet they're standing behind mom and letting mom do the asking. It just makes me laugh. And she says, my boys would, when your big kingdom comes and the thrones are promised, can they have your right hand, your left? Today's world, we would say vice president and secretary of state. When you're president, one boy, let one boy be the vice president, the other boy secretary of state. Would you do that? And Jesus says, you don't even begin to understand what you're asking for. They like most of us, without forethought, without much reflection, just jump right into it and say, we can take whatever you want to dish out. As long as we get these 2 seats, we're good. Now, the turning point in all this is verse 24. The other 10 heard this. They were indignant. You know what indignant means, don't you? Silently ticked. Don't you love when you walk in and you see your spouse and you can tell by looking at them something's wrong? No. Yeah, I don't love that. Right. Something's wrong. You cannot not communicate. And your perception is immediately, tell me what's wrong, especially if I'm involved. Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me what's upsetting you. Don't you love the response? Nothing. And it's like, oh, now we're really in trouble. If there's a musical note involved in the nothing, you know you're in trouble. Or I love the response of, well, if I have to tell you, I'm not going to. Well, that's really helpful. These 10 are indignant, and they began to treat James and John differently. It's Mark that tells us that they begin to argue among themselves. And what does Jesus do? Verse 25, he calls them all together. And I'm not going to read this the way I think Jesus said it. I don't think he's calm here. I do not think he is calm. I think Jesus has kind of reached the point of, guys, what have we been doing for the last 2.5 years? Almost 3 years now. Have you not gotten the message yet? I think he's pretty much in that position of, how many times do I need to explain this to you before you get the message? The reason I say that, there's 2 reasons. Number one, at the beginning here, he says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lorded over them. That's code language for Rome. He doesn't use Rome, but Gentiles would be Rome. That's the way Jews referred to the Romans. They didn't like to call them Rome because it would mean that they were subservient. So if they called them Gentiles, it's, we're here, you're out there, you're not part of us, you're not, you're excluded from us. So call them Gentiles. He says, don't you know the Gentiles lorded over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them? That phrase, exercise authority over them, is an interesting phrase. It's a word, a series of words that mean Give you an image of what it means. Twist the arm behind your back and pull. I have an older brother. This was one of his great techniques for getting me to do what I didn't want to do. He would twist my arm, put it up behind my back, and just lift until you feel that shoulder kind of pull a little bit. And he would say, "Will you?" You let go. No. And we would do, I'll tell you the other one, but it's really gross. But I'll tell you anyway. He would get me on the ground and he would put his knees into my shoulders and then spit and hold the spit over my face and then suck it back up and tell you it's hitting you next, unless it's really gross, isn't it? How many are younger siblings? See, we all have pain. We all have pain. It's deep inside. The second reason, let me finish the first reason. He says, he calls them Gentiles. You're acting like a bunch of Gentiles. You're acting like Rome. All Rome wants to do is control. All Rome wants to do is have power. You're acting like a bunch of Romans. You're acting like a bunch of Gentiles. So Jesus is establishing on the front end, this is how you can do relationship. You can do relationship by power, which is not the way I want to see it done. The second reason why I know he's not quiet is verse 26, not so with you. Not so with you. If you want to emphasize something in this ancient language, you would put the negative at the beginning. And that's what Jesus does. So it's an emphasis. And when the emphasis is at the beginning, it usually means somebody's shouting. You're acting like a bunch of Gentiles. I'm not going to have it. Not the way I'm going to have it in my kingdom. You get it? I don't think Jesus is calm. I think his blood pressure's up a little bit. I think his heart rate is up. I think he's breathing a little bit. And he wants his disciples to understand there's a different way to do relationships. And it's not going to be out of power. It's going to be, and this is where he defines himself and his disciples. If you want to win, you got to lose. If you want to be first, you got to be last. You want to be great? Be the least. And oh, by the way, Jesus is setting up this paradox. So let me go back, make sure we're all on the same page. There are two ways to do relationships. You do them out of power or you do them out of losing. We call it service. That's a nice way. But service means you lose. Service means you're last. Service means you give up. You don't get what you want. Now back up. Actually, when you lose, give up, you get what you want. Because when you're filled with the Spirit, what you want is what God wants. Yep. Shake your head, yes. You actually get what you want through service. But there's only two ways to do relationships. All relationships function either through power or through service. And Jesus says, power is the way of the world. Power is the way of the Gentiles. Power is the way of whoever has the most controls the situation. And he says, not in my kingdom. In my kingdom, it is not about power. Anyone in here want to deny that Jesus had power? Can we all affirm Jesus had power? But his power was not in dictating to other people. He called them to live differently. He called them to change. But he never twisted the arm. He reasoned. He told stories. In God's kingdom, people filled with the Spirit learn service. And by the way, Jesus says, watch me show you what it really looks like. It's not time for the cross yet, but it's not long. And he says, the time's coming when I will show you. He could have called 10,000 angels. You know that song? Could have called 10,000. We sing that song and we know it's true, and it is absolutely true. A man with that kind of power, let me back up, a God with that kind of power could call angels and get rid of the cross. Jesus says, I'm going to show you. Watch what I do. And I'm going to show you what service looks like. I'm going to lose. I'm going to give up. I'm going to be last. And in all of that, God's kingdom will win. That just kind of, because we live in a world, tell me a relationship that isn't based on power. Work, come on, work, power. Somebody's telling you what to do, right? And expecting it to be done. I love the employer who comes to you and says, can you do so-and-so? And I start to have this discussion. They say, well, you do remember who you work for. Oh, okay, got it. That's power. Jesus is calling his disciples to take on a role that is not the norm, not only in his culture, but in ours. And I'm not here to talk to you about employers. I'm here to talk to you about marriage. So let's start there. What would happen? What would happen if we viewed communication through the lens of service? Because frankly, we too often use communication as a sign of power. Don't raise your hand. Sit very still. Act like nothing's going on. Don't want anybody to admit to anything you don't want to have to explain later. You ever pout? You ever withdraw? You ever spend the time yakking? That's not just women, by the way. That's just not women. Talking all the time in your spouse's ear, trying to get them to do whatever. Ever withhold sex? Demand more? All that's power. What would happen if we looked at communication through the lens of service? I cannot go back and redo my early days as a husband. I can't do it. And when I talk about the early days, I mean the first 3 decades. I can't do it. I can't go back. To say that my dad was a silent person would be an understatement. Mom did all the talking. And maybe Dad, well, Mom told me that in private he talked a lot. But with us, my brother and I, we didn't hear a whole lot from him. Mom did most of the talking. And so very much I was kind of groomed that way to just be a non-talker. I'm inside my head doing my own internal things. In those early years of marriage, I didn't tell Barbara what I was afraid of. I didn't tell her what I was upset about. I'm supposed to handle this. I'll take care of it. And left her out. And she could have been the greatest resource, but I deprived her of that. And by doing so, I actually took on the mantle of power. If you're on the outside looking in, all you can do is tap on the window, right? Can I come in? No, I've got this. Some things happened that broke me, not least of which was being surrounded by 3 guys that just kept saying, you got to change. You got to change. And those 3 guys, one of whom has died, did his funeral 3 years ago, but those 2 remaining guys still get in my ear every so often and say, what kind of husband are you now? How are you doing? That's another subject, but we need guys to help us in this journey who will get in our ear and tell us the truth. What would happen if communication suddenly became a service, part of serving each other, rather than power? So that's where we are. We cannot not communicate. We are always going to be sending messages, and the messages that we send are often messages of power rather than service. So let's talk about some, if you will, practical aspects of communication. I'm not ready yet to talk about how to apply some of this, but some practical aspects. What we know is that when it comes to speaking, we have a hard time being direct. We are basically trained to be indirect. Now, this is not true in all cultures, but it is in ours. Even in our most direct days, we tend to hint more than we tend to be direct. Let me give you an example. Husband and wife are traveling on the interstate. I don't know why men drive more than women. Statistically, women are better drivers than men, but that's another subject too. But they drive less. Oh, maybe so. I don't know. I'm not even going to touch that. Okay. Well, let that go. But let's say they're driving down the interstate, and, in this day and time where it's always bucket seats up front, 2 separate seats, no longer the bench seat. Miss the bench seat. Miss the bench. I missed the bench seat. Barbara and I had bench seats when we were dating. That was nice. But anyway, driving down the road, and she looks up and she sees this sign that says McDonald's next exit. And she looks over at him and she goes, hey, 2 miles, there's a McDonald's. Let's stop and get something to drink. Would you like to stop and get something to drink? And he's driving. He's focused on the road. He's thinking about, destination, A to B, right? That's what he's thinking about. And he goes, no. And he keeps driving, passes the exit, keeps going. And he looks over and he realizes, maybe he's gone deaf because his wife has stopped talking. And he looks over, and she's just polishing, the door frame. She's just got her whole body turned. She's just doing, and he says, what's wrong? And she says, you don't know? He just kind of looks at her. He said, well, I don't understand. We're just driving. You didn't stop and get something to drink. Now, here's the point. Would you like to get something to drink in a man's ear is an option. It is not a request. It's an option. If you want something to drink, why not just say, I want something to drink? Stop here. 2 miles, stop at McDonald's. I want a Coke. I want a Diet Coke. I don't know what you want, but whatever it is, I want something to drink. Well, now you can have a negotiation. But when it's, would you like to get something to drink? He hears option. Well, he took the wrong option, but the option was, I can say no to this. Do you want something to drink? No. It's like my mom always thought I was cold. I'm extremely hot-natured. Extremely hot-natured. And if it was chilly outside, she knew I needed a jacket. And I would say, I don't want a jacket. And when you're 32 and your mom is telling you, you need a jacket, you kind of, Mom, really, let it go. I don't need a jacket. At some point, we communicate through hints and innuendos. And all that does, it's actually a form of power. Because we're insisting that our mate understand. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a mind reader. Never been good at it. Never been good at it. The other part that I'd like for us to consider is that 80% of communication is nonverbal. I've looked and looked and looked. I'm trying to find somebody who would say it's not that much, but it is. Most of our communication is not with words. It's with body language. It's with tone of voice. It's with heavy sighs. You know, if I walked up, EJ? Yeah. If I walked up to EJ and I looked at him and I said, EJ, how you doing? And EJ went, okay. I heard okay. But how could I ignore the heavy side and the tone of voice that simply said, I'm not okay? Right? And yet this is what we do. In fact, we do it almost every Sunday morning. How you doing? Okay. And we go, great, glad to hear it. And it's like, whoa, you missed it. You missed the message. 42 years at the same place, I kind of pick up on people's personalities after a while. And people have learned that I will not just go, great, glad to hear it, and move on. I tend to listen more carefully. But I stopped a lady the other day. She said, I'm okay. And I said, well, I'm not really convinced about that. You want to talk about it? She looked, no, I don't want to talk about it. Okay, but you're not okay. No, I'm not okay. Okay. And in my head, I'm going, well, stop lying. Stop lying. Tell me the truth. I want to hear the truth. Don't you think your spouse wants to hear the truth? Or are we at the point of thinking they can't handle the truth? Which is really what communication is. It's a symptom of something else. Poor communication is a symptom of something else. When couples come to me and say, we just don't communicate, what they are telling me is they have a symptom of another deeper problem. Several years ago, I had bronchitis. I didn't know I had bronchitis. So I did all the things that you do when you think you don't have bronchitis, but you're trying to treat the symptoms of bronchitis, right? You buy over-counter stuff, to take care of the cough and to take care of all the congestion and all that kind of stuff. And, did that for three days or so and started feeling better. And I thought, okay, we're kicking out this cold or whatever it was, and we're moving on. And about 2 days after that, fever spiked, symptoms got worse. And what did I need? I needed an antibiotic. Because the symptoms were not, I was only treating the symptoms. I wasn't treating the underlying condition. You with me? And the only way to treat the underlying condition is to get the right medicine so that you can heal. Communication, or the lack thereof, is a symptom of an underlying condition. When couples don't talk to each other, or they talk to each other in ways that are less than service-oriented, it's a symptom that there's a deeper issue. And the deeper issue is this: you don't trust each other. It's a trust issue. It's not a communication issue. I can't tell her, I can't tell him, because I don't know what she'll do with it or what he'll do with it. They'll become upset. And I don't want them to be upset. No, what you don't want is to deal with the upsetness. It's not that you don't want your spouse to be upset. You don't want to deal with it. Another symptom. I'm afraid if I tell them this, it will change the nature of our relationship. Good. Good. Don't you see that? It's a positive, not a negative. Okay, so let me explain that real quick. If you pretend to be something that you're not, are you building trust? Is the relationship built upon truth? Is the relationship built upon a reliability about who you are, or only about who you pretend to be? And how long can you keep going with the pretending before it gets old and you get tired and worn out pretending? How, to put it another way, more directly, because I don't want any hints and innuendos here, how much longer can you keep lying to yourself and to your spouse before it does major damage? It'll change our relationship. Good. It needs to change. Something needs to happen. The inability to talk to your spouse is a symptom that you don't trust. I love it when people say, I can tell my spouse anything. And I think, good for you. Good for you. Had a client with a pornography problem. He said, I've got to deal with it. And I said, okay, you got to start with your wife. Oh, no. Oh, yes. I can't tell her. Yes, you can. She'll hate me for a while. She might leave me. She might. That's the risk. But she's going to be your best defender and your best support. Because this struggle is not going to go away just because you come to me and say, I want it to go away. 3 weeks later, he comes in and he says, I told her. Tell me about it. She cried. Okay. We talked. Good. And then she said, and then he started crying. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. You are my husband. And I promise to love you until one of us died. And I looked at him and I said, better? Oh, better. No more lies. Only truth. Only truth. We need our relationships to change. And the only way they change is if we trust each other. The only way it becomes what God wants it to be. To trust each other means that we have to be last. We have to give up. We have to lose. Otherwise, it's about power. So let me back up and talk about trust just real quick. By the way, we're still talking about communication. We haven't changed subjects yet, okay? We're still on communication. So let me back up and talk to you about trust real quick. How many of you believe trust is earned? How many of you believe trust is given away? Is it? Is it scary? How many of you go to restaurants? How many of you place your order and then follow the server back to the kitchen to watch your food being cooked? How many of you inspect the kitchen before you go and sit down? Anybody fly on an airplane? How many of you, when getting on the airplane, stop and ask to meet the pilot? Ask to see his credentials or her credentials? How many of you asked to see the last mechanical inspection documents for that airplane? How many are you now asking, is this a Boeing 737? How many are you asked, do we not give trust away? Listen, I flew up here, I'm going to fly back, and I promise you, I'm going to get on that plane, I'm going to find my seat, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to buckle up, and I'm just going to sit there and wait for the ride. I'm trusting whoever's in that cockpit hasn't had a drink, isn't on any kind of illegal substance, and is ready to do their job. But if every customer gets on an airplane and says, bring the pilot out, we all have to meet the pilot before we get on, that's not trust. And then even if he shows you his pilot's license, is that enough? What school did you go to? Who was your instructor? How many hours do you have on this plane? I'm telling you, we give trust away all the time. Why is it that in relationships we think you got to earn it first? You got to earn it first. If you wait for a person to earn it, you'll never date, number one. You would never have dated your spouse if you waited until your spouse earned it. Now, you took little bits of evidence that you saw. And for men, the evidence was, oh, she's pretty. That's it. And that's enough. But you saw little bits of evidence. And you took that little bit of evidence and you said, okay, I'll cross the line. I'll go out. We'll spend an evening together talking. And after that, if that's a good experience, then that gives you a bit more evidence to keep moving forward, right? What happens when the evidence demonstrates that trust has been broken? You can answer that. What happens? Do I? Yeah, we withdraw. Yeah, we say, oh, whoa, put on the brakes. My brother and his wife broke up 3 times before they finally got married. And after the 3rd time, I went to her and I said, you should not marry my brother. I don't know what's going on. And she says, I love him. I just need him to do a couple more things. Yeah, I get it. And they've been married 45 years. And, it's wonderful. It's great. We have to step across the line. That's what serving people do. We step across the line. First. I referenced this last night in Ephesians chapter 5. It is not there in the text where it says, if your husband loves you adequately, then you should submit. That's not what the text says. It does not say, if your wife submits to you adequately, then you should love her. That's not what the text says. In fact, we did not look at verse 33, and that's intentional. I wanted to look at it today. So turn to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. And at the end of this tremendous text, where Paul has finally revealed that the mystery about the oneness that is experienced from Adam and Eve all the way through until the end of time, and he's saying this relationship between husband and wife is about the relationship between Christ and the church. He ends, however, it's kind of like, well, just in case you don't tie all this together, let me tie it all together for you. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Whoa! There are no conditions there. There are no conditions. This is unconditional. Husbands, love your wife as you love yourself. Take care of your body physically, yes, but take care of the body that belongs to you, your wife. She's now your body. Take care of her. And wives, respect your husband. Notice he didn't use the word submit. He didn't come back to that word. He used the word respect, which means to reverence. Oh, now we're into it, aren't we? Yeah, reverence. Think of it this way: to express to him in a way that he understands that he has worth and value. Isn't that what we do when we reverence God? And I'm not saying the man is God. Do not hear me say the man is God. That's not what I said. But when we reverence God, do we not express to him his worth and value? Men, love your wife. Unconditional. You love her when the best way to love her is not when it's easy. The hard way to love her is when it's hard. That's when love's really necessary. When all the warm fuzzies are right and everything's good and everybody's in a good mood, and that's no trouble. That doesn't take much. It's to love your wife when she's unlovable. It's to love your wife when she's in your ear. It's to love your wife when she rejects you. It is to love your wife no matter what. Wives, respect your husband. Express worth and value to him. What if he acts in unworthy ways? We're going to talk about forgiveness after our brunch. We'll talk about forgiveness. Does your husband still have worth when he messes up? Oh, please shake your head, yes. If you're going to demand his perfection, you're demanding out of power, not service. And there's only two ways to do relationships: power or serve. It's only two ways. So we're still talking about communication. You with me? Let me give you 2 or 3 things for you to consider. Oh, by the way, I love this. I love this quote. Have y'all seen the movie We Bought a Zoo? Oh, it's not that it's a great movie. I don't know. I don't even know if it won anything in the Academy Awards or anything. There's a line in that movie, however, that when I heard it the first time, I went, "Oh, that's good. That is really good." Barbara says I ruin movies all the time because I watch movies. It's rare for me to watch movies just from an entertainment perspective. I'm always looking for theological undertones or, some kind of counseling technique or something in there. And we're watching this movie, and there's this line in here. It's where I don't remember the characters' names, but it's Matt Damon talking to his son about courage. You remember this? His son, as I recall the scene, his son is interested in talking to a young lady, but he's really scared that he'll be rejected and all that kind of thing. And Matt Damon's wife has died, right, in the movie. Spoiler alert. And his wife has died, and he knows, and so he says this to his son. Sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage. Just literally 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery. and I promise you, something great will come of it. And I heard that line and it was like, oh, that is rich. That is so good. Because if we're going to communicate with each other, somebody has to go first. Men, it's us. Somebody has to go first. Men, it's us. Somebody has to go first. Men, it's us. 20 seconds of insane courage to tell your wife what you really are thinking. And it'll change. Something dramatic will happen. And communication then becomes about serving, not power. 2 or 3 things for you to consider. Number one, to help with communication, learn to balance the communication. Learn to balance the conversation. It isn't just women who do all the talking. It isn't. So we have to find a way to balance that. We have to find a way to make sure that each person's getting time to talk. Now you say, well, my spouse is given time, they just don't take advantage of it. Can I tell you something? I think you know this is true. Not everybody's the same. Can we say that? Not everybody's the same. And I'm not talking about just the difference between men and women. I'm talking about the differences between people. I am a processor. What does that mean? If you unload a bunch of stuff on me, don't be waiting for me to go, got it. I got to process a little bit. And processing for me is to be quiet so I can think. And sometimes Barbara will say something. I'm processing. I'm just processing. Let me think through it. Because I don't want to say the wrong thing. And there's certain amount of wisdom in waiting to talk, but that's me. There are other people who are quick to express, and it works for them. I'm a processor. So my eyes go up toward the ceiling, my brain kicks in, I'm doing all the thinking, and sometimes that's understood as withdrawal. It's not. For me, I'm trying to think. I want to think through this. So we have to find a balance. Give your partner opportunity. If you're a fast talker, do your talking and then wait. To demand that your partner join you when they're a different personality is the demand of power, not of service. You got it? Number 2, not only do we need to try to find balance, communication largely as couples is about information. We overlook this. It really is important to share all kinds of information. I'll have these young college students who will say, but we want these deep conversations. Go into a well. I don't know, what does that mean, deep conversations? We want deep conversation. You know, what that means usually is we want to talk about our feelings, our emotions, and all of that. And guess what? That comes after lots of information. Many times it comes in the sharing of information. And while you're listening to your spouse talk about, hey, this is what I've got to do today, da 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 da, and then all of a sudden, if you're listening, if you're paying close attention, what you hear is, ooh, you've got a full day. How's your energy? Is it good? Are you up for it? What do we need to do about that? Can I take something off your plate? See, that's service. But it's in the information. I was talking with a bunch of guys this several years ago. We were sitting around and one of the guys said, you know, my wife tells me that I don't talk enough. And I said, okay. When you're the resident counselor, everybody says, let me tell you what my wife, I go, okay, that's fine. I'll listen to that. And he said, you know, my wife tells me I don't talk enough. And there's 4 or 5 guys sitting in a circle. And I said, and he's looking at me, so I know he's talking to me. And I said, okay. he said, so I'm going to tell you what I think. Oh, all right, here we go. Raising kids is hard. And then he went back to eating ice cream. And I thought, you just said a whole lot in 4 words. Did you hear what he said? I'm trained, okay? I'm trained. But did you hear what he said? EJ, how are you? Okay. Did you hear what he said? I know he didn't say it. I'm saying it for him. But did you hear? Raising kids is hard. And he says it in a tone of voice that says, what? I am frustrated. I don't know what to do. Now, what his wife was wanting was, tell me how hard. Tell me how deeply hard it is. Tell me about the emotions. He did. He told you. He just told you. This is some of the hardest stuff I've ever had to do, raising kids. I'm tired. I'm worn out. And she's going, me too, me too. Listen. Service understands it's about what you're saying first, and then we'll chime in. Balance the conversation. Inform. Don't, listen, I learned a long time ago, and it took, again, I can't undo the previous days, previous years, but I learned a long time ago when I come in and Barbara says, how was work? She does not want to hear, good, fine. I don't know where men thought the idea of, good, fine, dinner was all that any woman wanted to hear when he walked in. It is like speaking in grunts and those kind of things. Somehow, oh, now she's ready to fall at your feet. You're so expressive. Guys, our job when we walk in, she's had a hard day, you've had a hard day. She says, how was your day? Because she wants to hear. And what I learned is anything that happens to me affects her. Every conversation I have affects her. So when I say, hey, I had a conversation with my department chair today, what'd y'all talk about? She's not just seeking information. She's wondering, do you still have a job? Do we need to pack? She's wondering more than just, yeah, I talked to my department chair today. What'd y'all talk about? Oh, it was great. It was a great conversation. And I'll tick through what we talked about. Why? Not because I think she needs to know every detail, but I know that she needs to know every detail. Because it affects her. Now, she will be the first to tell you that my memory is really bad. and sometimes I'll leave out details, but they usually pop up sometime later. And I'll go, oh yeah, we also talked about this. And she'll go, what are we talking about? But department chair. Yeah. Oh yeah, that conversation. Number 3, learn to be interested in each other's stuff. Learn to be interested in each other's stuff. I don't know what the stuff includes, but learn to be interested in it. Barbara loves HGTV. She used to. She tells me it's so repetitive. And I thought, yeah, 5 years ago I thought it was. But anyway, but if we're at home, she'll want to know what's on HGTV tonight. And I'll say, oh, Fixer to Fabulous is on. You know, that couple in Arkansas. And we'll talk about them for a little bit. Do you know, I don't like HGTV. But she does. She does. And I want to be interested in it because she's interested in it. And I can tell you about, listen, I have seen so many remodeled kitchens. And Barbara will say, isn't that a pretty color? And I'll go, looks very similar to yellow. No, it's not yellow. I, on the other hand, very interested in sports. I like sports. I follow certain teams. I keep up with them. Bless her heart. She will say, how did your team do? She won't even say the name because she doesn't know necessarily. How did your team do? Well, we won. And then I'll give her a brief explanation about how it went, and she'll go, oh, that's nice, and she walks away. But we find interest in each other's things, find interest in each other's stuff, and talk about it. I've got 15 minutes to talk about conflict, so here we go. Conflict and communication go together because what drives communication, what drives the lack of communication? Mistrust. You with me? The reason we don't communicate is we don't trust each other. The lack of communication is a symptom of a deeper problem. There's not a trust issue. There's a trust issue. There's not enough trust between the two of you to share your heart. 20 seconds of unbelievable, insane courage can change all of that. I'm not saying it'll suddenly be, roses and Hallmark movies. I'm not saying that. It will suddenly turn into, whoa, what happened? But it will change your relationship if one of you, men, will take the courage, men, to speak up, men, and say to your spouse what you are really experiencing. If you'll communicate that, life will get better in time. So conflict is very much the same. Because there's a lack of trust, conflict is driven by fear. Listen, I don't charge for counseling services. I never have. That's not a bragging thing. It's an agreement that I made with the congregation years ago. I would do counseling. They would compensate through salary. Got it? So I don't charge clients for counseling. But if I were to charge you for this is $200 an hour stuff. You need to remember this, okay? What drives conflict is fear. When you're in conflict with your spouse, it's because you're afraid of something. You're afraid of something. Maybe you're afraid of being rejected. Maybe you're afraid of being discouraged. Maybe you're afraid of feeling worthless. Maybe you're afraid, and on and on and on we could go. We got to find out what the fear is. When couples come in and they say, we just fight all the time. In my head, I'm going, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Conflict generates within the body, physiologically generates within us the same thing that fear does. If you see a dog that's got barking, snarling teeth exposed, you automatically have this adrenaline rush. Conflict does the same thing. Your body doesn't know the difference between the barking dog and the spouse that's yelling at you. It doesn't know the difference. Your body physiologically responds in the same way. And when you see that dog, you know what's going to happen. Your heart rate's going to go up. Your pupils are going to, what was that called? Constrict. Dilate. No, that's the wrong way. Constrict. They're going to constrict because you're going to get focused in. Heart rate up. Dilation, the eyes constrict, the pupils constrict so you can see more clearly. You'll start sweating. Your breathing will become more shallow. That's getting you revved up. More oxygen coming in so you can run. And so we take on what's called the fight or flight response. You've heard this before? Fight or flight. Arguing spouse, conflict with spouse, or a snarling dog, it doesn't matter. By the way, I'm not calling your spouse a snarling dog. I'm just using the combination to make the point. All right? There's a third F. It's called frozen. We know about fight or flight. The third F is frozen. Frozen is where you can't fight and you can't run. You're just stuck. You're frozen. And many couples don't realize that frozen is also a fear reaction. You just suddenly lose the ability to think. You lose the ability to react. You lose, and you just it's what we are told. When you see the bear, just stand still, don't move. They'll leave you alone. No, they won't. They'll eat you. So you got to run. Just find a tree real quick and get up. Yeah. Friend of mine spends her summer in Alaska, and she sent me a newspaper a couple of years ago from her hometown there, and it says, it was on the front page, "Don't forget your bear spray." Okay, it's kind of like, this is, you walk out with your keys and your bear spray. That's what you use. Okay, anyway. Conflict arises because we're afraid of something, and because we're afraid of something, when we become afraid, what do we do with our fear? Run, fight, froze, right? One of those three things. If you run, we call that avoidance. We call it withdrawing. Barbara and I had an argument in our first year of marriage. Can you believe that? It's supposed to be, all roses and all that. Our first year of marriage, we lived in a small apartment, and we had this argument. And in my household, when you got into an argument, you settled it. In her household, you walked away. So in our dating life, we hadn't had too many arguments. We'd had some, but not any. But this was a major one. This was a big one. That first year of marriage is pretty pressurized. At least it was for us. And so we're in this argument, and she turns to go to the bedroom, and I'm just following her. It's like, we're not through. Surely we're not through with this. And she's just going into the bedroom. She's going to shut the door, bury her. And I grabbed at her wrist, and I said, "Wait." And she snatched her wrist away from me, and she said, "Don't you ever touch me in anger." I said, I'm just trying to finish this argument. She was running, flight. I was fighting. We both should have chosen frozen. Just kind of relax. Gottman says what couples need to do is take a break. They just need to take about a 15 to 20 minute break and then come back and try to be rational. And he understands couples aren't going to be rational in the middle of conflict. But he says that's what happens. When it starts revving up, you just need to take a break. Conflict comes because of fear. And if we can define what the fear is, now you've got a conversation. But here's the other thing. It's not only the fight or flight or frozen response. Your fear causes fear in your spouse. Fear begets fear. So when you get afraid, what is unknown to you is you're trying to express your fear in a way that is not necessarily rational, but in a way that will make your spouse pay attention. And for most of us, when we are trying to pay attention, even in our greatest rational states, as we're trying to pay attention to what our spouse is expressing to us in this conflict, there's a part of us who is trying to defend ourselves. And in that defense, we see their fear and we become afraid. Am I being rejected? Now it's harping on my fear. I was working with a couple. Their first thing, we fight all the time. And nobody fights all the time. Nobody fights all the time. They came close, but he says, from the moment I walk in, she's on me about something. And I'm listening to how this all starts. And it's really not about her being on something. You know what it is, don't you? Come on. You know what it is? While she's waiting for him to come home, she's been at work, she's got home, she sees all this stuff. They got 3 kids. There's stuff that needs to be done. And she's overwhelmed. She's got so much on her plate. And as soon as he walks in, it's the light bulb needs to be changed. This needs to be done. This got to be. She's dumping her list on him, right? And he's walking in going, "Give me 30. Give me 10. The kids are running. The baby needs to be changed. Go do that. Give me 10. Give me 15. And it's like, wait, what is she afraid of? Her list won't get done. But what does that say about her? Come on. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. That's what she's afraid of. I won't be good enough. I can't tell you how many wives have come to me and said, "I'm not a good wife." Based upon what? Well, I can't ever get everything done. Oh, so only good wives get everything done. Only the good wives. That's the measure? Perfection? You'll lose every time. She's got her list, and she's afraid she won't get her list done because her fear is, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. He'll know it. If I can't get everything done, he'll know I'm not good enough. And then he'll reject me. Oh, do you see how this is spiraling? And now she turns to him. He walks in and he says, hey, hon. And he's trying to be in a good mood, but he knows what's coming because the pattern's already been established. And he's going, hey, hon. And she says, the baby needs to be changed and I need to get supper started and this light bulb needs to. And he's going, whoa, hang on just a minute. Hang on just a minute. And she goes, we can't hang on. We've got things to do. Call Junior in and get him a bath. And I mean, she's directing all of this because it's her list, right? And now what does he do? He's been rejected. She didn't mean that. She didn't mean to reject him, but that's what he felt. And so what's he afraid of? Rejection. He's afraid of rejection. You know, he has this idealized view. When he comes home, she'll be there to greet him with this warm kiss and a hug. And that hasn't happened in years. But the idealized view is still there. And he has felt rejected for a long time, but has never said anything to her. And so when this couple comes in and says, we fight all the time, and I'm listening to her and I'm listening to him and I'm going, you're afraid of not being good enough. You're afraid of being rejected. And y'all are both accomplishing that through each other. You're getting exactly what you're afraid of through this conflict. Does that make sense? Sitting down with a couple, you know, they say, fix us. That's their message. Fix us. And I'm going, I can't fix what you don't understand. And what you don't understand is how fear is driving your conflict. So here's what you need to do. I've got 2 minutes. Give me 2 minutes, all right? 2 minutes. Here's what you need to do with conflict. Number one, you got to do a pretty close self-examination of what it is that makes you afraid in this world. What is it that you're really afraid of? I've got a list of 20 things here. I'm not going to read all 20, but I've given you several. Feeling like a failure, being misunderstood, feeling worthless, being abandoned, feeling powerless, being lonely, being ignored, being unwanted. We could go on. There's more. Find out what your real fear is. 20 seconds of insane courage. Would you share it with your spouse? I promise you it will diffuse most of your conflicts because it is coming out of your fear. This is not easy, and that's part of the reason why I'm in business, right? People come talk to me. That's part of the reason why I do counseling, because it's not an easy task. It really does take you to separate for just a while, not from your spouse, but from the world, check out for a little while and do some introspection. Figure this out. Whatever it is, go back to your last really good argument with your spouse. Good. Go back to that and think about what were we really arguing about? Ever had one of those arguments when it was over with, you went, I don't even know what we were arguing about. We're just arguing. It's fear. That's what you're arguing about. Your fear, each other's fear. So do the introspection and find out what it is. Number two, confess it to your spouse. Confess it to your spouse. This is what I'm really afraid of. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of not being good enough. I'm afraid of this. Now, that doesn't solve the problem. but it's the beginning of understanding why the conflict is occurring. And for the person who feels worthless, like they have no value, like they have to be perfect, for that person to get that out in front doesn't suddenly make you perfect, but it does allow your spouse to look at you in those times of great tension. Genesis 3:17, there's always going to be tension. In those times of great tension, to be able to look at you and say, I just need you to be you. You don't have to be perfect. Let's take a step back. You're not using it as a battering ram to demean them. You're using it as an opportunity to further your spouse to further understand, I am here to serve you. I'm not here to break you, to hurt you. I'm on your side. And never, ever will I leave you. I will be here. And suddenly the fear can turn. It won't go away, but it can turn. And you can find with your spouse this communication that you've always sought, always wanted. Because men, 20 seconds of insane courage, we told our wife what we're afraid of. And it makes us, like Jesus, able to bless our wife, to share our life with her in a way that she's always wanted. And it provides for the wife an opportunity to say, here's my fear too. Because you guys took the first shot, the first chance of getting this right. I got more to say about conflict, but that's pretty much a kernel of it, and it's good. It's good stuff. I'm not saying I'm good. I'm saying there's more to say, and it's good stuff, but we need to stop here, okay? Let me pray with you. We'll have our brunch, right? Okay? Let me pray. This marriage thing is hard. It is complicated because people are complicated. Sin gets in the way, and we can't get it out of the way. There is no way for us, Father, to go back to that time before sin entered the world. And the tension that we feel in our relationships from time to time, as much as we don't want them, we have to recognize that it's just a part of a sin-filled world. So, Father, give us courage. Give us the opportunities to be courageous with each other, to share what is really going on, so that our spouse can be our biggest and best support, so that our communication can be deep and loving, but also meaningful as we walk hand in hand in this world together towards heaven. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.